Hello, everyone. Happy Memorial Day, the day we remember those here and across the world, really, that died for our countries. Everyone who gave their lives, the military men and women who have given their lives during war, during conflict, during peacetime, and then since who gave their lives from PTSD and things that maybe weighed on them after the service. So after I posted my video last week about PFC Likens, who was brought back and buried last year after they found his remains, I had a gentleman reach out to me and wanted to share a story with me about somebody that was in his family that was brought home as well. This gentleman who shared this story with me is a funeral director down in Missouri, and so wanted to share a little about Private Everett Glenn with you. So I have he sent me the case file and some pictures and things. I'm going to just share a little bit with you. So as you're going about your day today, I want you to remember PFC Likens and Private Glenn and men and women like them who gave their lives for you so you could have freedom. So I begin this story about this man. This is Private Everett Glenn. And I'm sharing from Doug Glenn down in Missouri. He said, "Hello, Kari. I hardly know where to begin, but I will attach the digital file of the military papers. This is for your discretion to view and use as you think appropriate. I am only one of a few distant relatives of Everett Glenn. He was my great uncle. I never met him. There is only a few distant cousins left. I was very young when my great-grandmother, I can't speak this morning, guys, when my great-grandmother, Leona Glenn, was living. The documents are addressed to her name as she was the only next of kin back in the 1940s. I had one great aunt who I knew quite well. I was an adult when she was still living and we were close to her. She was the person who left the photographs of the graveside service and part of the items. In the photo of the graveside service is my great aunt and my great grandmother. The family was from rural central Missouri. Mail went to the town of Bell, Missouri. They actually lived out in the country on small farms. My uncle had a twin brother, his sister, and another two brothers. The reason I started to research was because at about the time of 2005 and 2015, there were several documentaries about World War II anniversaries. Finding Private Ryan, The Band of Brothers. I've seen those. If you guys haven't seen those movies and documentaries and series, they're so good and tell you a lot about what happened during, that wartime. Various things to spur my interest and wanted to give my uncle a recognition on the internet, a digital record. So I put the information on Find a Grave. So Find a Grave is a website that catalogs headstones and grave markers at cemeteries across the country. And I don't know if it's international. That's a good question that just popped in my head. But so I could look up, let's say, somebody's headstone in California. And if one of the people who donate their time and efforts to go around and catalog cemeteries has taken a photo at that cemetery and placed it on the website, I can then see a photo of that headstone and I can know what it looks like without having to travel to California to see that headstone in person. You could also upload photos of the people. And so it's kind of a ancestry type file as well for people who are doing genealogy and trying to look into the history of their families. So he was trying to place this information for his great uncle. As a longtime funeral director, I've worked for many years in the Missouri area, primarily in St. Louis. I was a senior director employed 33 years at Hutchins Mortuary in Florissant, Missouri. While the years went by, I've helped many thousands of families and been to the Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery hundreds of times, each times with veterans, a new and individual story for the veterans and the veteran survivors. Not only does the veteran make sacrifices, but the family also makes sacrifices. It has been my honor to serve the veterans and the veteran groups. I thought I'd attempt to get Everett Glenn's details of his service, the date and place he died, and some of the specifics on his death. I contacted the military offices, and with the Freedom of Information Act, it is possible to get the records. It took about 18 months to receive the digital files. So patience. If you're looking for information about somebody in your history, make sure you have patience because it takes a while to get records. There is everything documented. Included are his death report, the way he was killed and injuries, the place of the temporary military cemetery, the letters by the family to have his body sent back to Missouri. I thought it interesting. The document file was sent to me with a one-time download. The cemetery in St. James, Missouri is where he is buried, the Masonic Cemetery. The photos are of the military honors detail and family at the burial in 1948. The city of St. James made a city proclamation. The military files, the pictures, as well as the letters he sent over to me then to share the story. So it's really interesting reading through to see this story in its entirety. So I'm going to share a few of these things with you because it's pretty impressive. So Private Everett had gone off to service, and he was over in Italy serving. And the day came, and his mother received one of these in the mail. I think we all hear about these type of telegrams that you get that say, "I'm so sorry. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Private Everett H. Glenn, has been reported missing in action since January 3 in Italy." So this is the telegram that told them that he was missing, and then he was found subsequently a little bit later. So he was not missing for very long, but when he was found, he was then buried in a cemetery over in Italy, a temporary location. And so the family was notified that he was buried there. So we then have a report of burial. I'll just kind of show this a little bit. Restricted. I feel like I'm broke into area, 51 or whatever? That's, when it's restricted and you get to see things. So, and it reports that near Mount Portia, Italy, on about January 7th, 1944, Private Everett Glenn was killed in action, gunshot wounds in the head, arms, face. He was identified with his dog tags, and it lists what he had on him possessions. He had 2 rings and some souvenir money. In other records, it says souvenir notes, which, notes are called money in some cultures and in some verbiage. And so this also says, who needs to be notified? So there was some confusion at the time because he had been married at one point. And so they were trying to locate his wife, his first wife, during some of the communication. And then his mom had to write back and say, no, they had been divorced. She's remarried 2 years ago. I'm the only person. You need to communicate with me. So his mom was who all the communication was sent to. And so he was buried in the Marzanello Nuovo Cemetery in Italy. So these temporary burial grounds were set up for a lot of individuals, but they didn't quite know where he was specifically. So a few years later, his brother, Emmett, so Everett and Emmett, wrote and said, "To whom it may concern, I had a brother who was killed in action in Italy on January 3rd, 1944. His name was Private Everett Glenn. I'd like to know where his body has been buried. I have several friends in Italy, and perhaps some of them will be near enough to get a picture of his grave. Any information you can send me regarding this will be deeply appreciated. Sincerely, Reverend Emmett Glenn." And he's from Missouri at that time. So he reached out and talked to them, and the military started communicating with the family. And they responded and told the family where he was buried in Italy. They also informed them, "We will help to bring him back to you if you want to bring him home and bury him with you back in your town." And so the process began, that they were going to be moving him from Italy back home to Missouri. It was a lengthy process. They had to disinter him, kind of catalog, do all these things, and then bring him home to reinter him back here. One of the documents, where's my document? Disinterment directive, that they were going to disinter him, and it listed the date of March 15th, 1948. So about 4 years after his death, they were disinterring him, and they were going to start the process of getting him back to Missouri, to Licklider Funeral Home in St. James, Missouri. It talks about that he was badly decomposed. He was buried in a shroud, so no caskets were used, no boxes, just shrouds. Let's see, what else does it say? The embalmer, the remains were prepared and placed in a casket on June 14th, 1948, and the embalmer was Bill Lack. I think that's super cool that there was a man who was embalming over in Italy, just named Bill Lack, and he was an embalmer just like me. And so it's really cool that you can read that and see that. And just like this man's, great nephew would become later. It's just really cool, guys. So then there's like a chain of custody where it says, he went from here to here to here. And they started setting up the services with the funeral home. And so they would tell them that, "Hey, we're going to be coming in by train on this date and this time, so meet us at the train station." So we're now down the line into August, and we're still having communication. So he was disinterred in June. In August, we're still setting up transportation. And then a lot more paperwork. They had to request to be able to bring him home and bury him. They had to request all of this. So finally, in September of 1947, Private Glenn was brought home for this burial. So here is, and these are super cool. Ooh, there we go. You can see what a country cemetery, like the grass is so long in the background. And I think of these other young men, like what are their stories? Where did they go along the way? Where did they end up on the journeys? And so we've got his mom and his sister, I think is what Mr. Glenn had said, had brought him back. And you've got the military there to do military honors. So a tradition as old as, draping the casket and honoring him. So he was able to be brought home to be with his family where they were. And I think that was pretty powerful. I think there was a the government paid, I feel like one of the things said $75 was what the fees were to bring him home and everything, which was, $75 seems such a small number compared to nowadays what things cost. I'm just looking through the file to share a few more things. So we also then have, let's see, here's a letter to Leona. The people of the United States through the Congress have authorized the disinterment and final burial of the heroic dead of World War II. The Quartermaster General of the Army has been entrusted with this sacred responsibility to the honored dead. The records of the War Department indicate that you may be the nearest relative. They sent a pamphlet about disposition of World War II armed forces dead, which is a crazy thing to be a title of a pamphlet. And then American Cemeteries that kind of went over their options. And so if they wanted to, they had to petition to be bringing people home. Imagine how many of these they actually did during that time, disinterments and such. So they asked her to complete the form. This was done from the War Department, Office of the Quartermaster General, 1946. I just love looking at I love history, guys. It's awesome. The War Department is most desirous that you be furnished information regarding the burial location of your son. And they told him what plot, what row, what grave he was in. So you can see, even though they buried him in another country and such, they kept really good records so that they could find these individuals and these soldiers if they needed to. And good morning to everybody. There's the report of death, the place of death, North African area, cause of death, killed in action, listed as family. The individual named on the observed side of this report is shown by the records to have been absent in a missing in action status on and subsequent to 3 January 1944, and until such absence was terminated by the receipt of evidence transmitted by a commander in the field, date of said termination being January 30th, 1944. So he was not missing for long before found and identified, and they couldn't tell exactly what his date of death was. So they, chose some, like we do sometimes now, where someone may be found in an exact date of death, but we know he died on or before a certain date. And then there also was the personal possession. There's a lot of documents about that, telling the mom, here's what we found with him. Do you want them? Yes, I want them. Please send them to me. It was very small, just the 2 rings and one lot of souvenir notes, which was money, as we find in other documents. And then she had to receive, and it's such a paper trail, truly. Sign 1 copy, place it in this, return this copy to the Bureau. So all this backwards and forward, trying to get home, track everything. And I can imagine if they did this with so many soldiers and individuals, the paper that was going on because of how much there is just for one individual. It's pretty impressive, all of this. So I'm so thankful, Mr. Glenn, for sharing your story of your great uncle. This is just one story of one hero who had gone off to war, died, was buried, and finally, a few years later, was able to be brought home and laid to rest with honors in his home country with his family, and they were able to pay honor to him. So I think it's really awesome that Mr. Glenn went and found this information about his great uncle. I think it's important to know where we come from, who is part of our history, good or bad, whatever it may be, to look into and find. Do you know the stories of your family that died in war or peacetime or died in the service? Today's the day to ask those questions as you're talking to your family and spending time with your family. Talk about Do we have those in our family who gave their life, who paid the highest price for us to have our freedom today? Ask those questions. Find out if there's a story in your family you don't know yet. Learn about the history of your family. But today, remember PFC Likens, remember Private Glenn, remember those who gave their lives for you. Have a good Memorial Day today, but let's remember what this day is about. Thanks, everyone. Bye.